大家好啊，今天是2025年的3月28号。3月25号呢，新加坡前总理李显龙呢有一个最新的专访，我觉得观点还是值得我们参考。这里呢，我们先一起来看一下吧，然后呢，我再给大家分析一下。
You mentioned, Senior Minister, earlier about the U.S.-China relationship that they have to work out, between themselves. And indeed, it is the most decisive relationship in the world, affecting our security and prosperity. Now, President Trump is said to be not a man of war. He also seeks to strike deals. In fact, he's come up with a grand bargain for Mr. Putin and Russia. Do you think a grand bargain is possible between the United States and China?
I think it would be difficult because the issues between the US and China have become deep. On the US side, fundamentally they have made an assessment that China is a pacing challenger. That means it's something which they have to treat not just as a partner, as a friendly country, but something which could pose a challenge, maybe even a threat to them. And what is behind this? I think they see China growing. They see China possibly becoming bigger than them, maybe stronger than them. And I think it is not acceptable to the Americans to have this happen, because they see differences between them and China quite fundamentally in terms of ideology, in terms of global influence, in terms of their place in the world. And they have decided that no, they must stay ahead, and one way or the other, they will stay ahead. And they will stop this from happening. On the Chinese side, they see themselves growing. They want to do business with the world, but at the same time, they see America as trying to block their growth. And to them, this is something which is crucial. They have the right to grow. Why should any country be able to tell me I can't do this or I can't do that? They feel they have the right to technology, they have the right to the same standard of living as the developed countries, and they want to take their rightful place in the world. They see it as their rightful place in the world. And so these are two very different, fundamentally contradictory mindsets. And underlying that, feeding that, are a series of very difficult questions over sovereignty, over security, over values, over political systems, over imbalances in global trade, over technology, over cybersecurity intrusions, which are not easily traded off or packaged together into a grand bargain. Each one is an absolutist thing in its own, at least in the basic mindsets of the countries. And therefore, I don't see a grand bargain. And yet, unless America and the US work together and have some kind of working arrangement, I think both will be in trouble and the world will be in trouble. Because if they clash with one another, it's going to be, they'll do a lot of harm to both and to the rest of the world. And so I hope some accommodation can be worked out. I can imagine some of the things which they have to do that, but it will not be easy.
Yes, I think it will be rocky, as you say, and maybe at times worse than rocky. I'd like to come now to what we read in the newspapers every morning, the tariff war and the retaliatory tariffs. It's not good for anyone, and there are no winners. How do you see this process or trajectory playing out?
Well, if you're an economist, you would advise China, your opponent is doing these things, imposing tariffs. He may think that it costs China, but actually it's also costing his own economy. Just stay calm and carry on. Don't do anything. Because if you do something, it will also hurt yourself. But politically, that's not possible. So when somebody does this to you, politically, even if he's your best friend, you have to do something to show that you have taken note that he has done this to you. And you have to respond. Even the Canadians are responding, or talking about responding. So therefore you have tit for tat, and therefore you go down the road, and it's not just tariffs, you have restrictions on exports, you have restrictions on investments. Basically you are bifurcating and you are dividing, and that way leads to a lot of trouble. The world hasn't seen it since the war, therefore maybe doesn't remember or doesn't quite feel what it is like, but it happened before the war. In the 1930s, when the economies went into a depression, there was a Smoot-Hawley Act. The tariffs, very high tariffs in the US, it triggered similar high barriers in the other developed countries. World trade plummeted. It deepened the recession. It caused great hardship in many countries, and it contributed to the political pressures and the tensions between countries, which eventually led to the Second World War. And people may have forgotten this, but in the Pacific, the war started with the attack on Pearl Harbor by Japan. What immediately preceded the attack on Pearl Harbor? It was a US embargo on Japan of petroleum and rubber, vital raw materials, and the Japanese started the Pacific War to secure those raw materials from Southeast Asia. Rubber and tin from Malaysia, petroleum products from Dutch East Indies in those days, now Indonesia. So that way leads to bad outcomes. In 1985, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was invited to address the US Congress joint sessions, and he made a speech on this theme. Those were different days. Ronald Reagan was the president, and he got a standing ovation. The mood has changed. The times have changed. Now you're not talking about the US versus Japan, you're talking about two nuclear powers. And so you may or may not go all the way to the end of the road. And hopefully somewhere before the end of the road, you will find an off-ramp and a way out which will enable us to stop short of the maximum damage to one another. But it will take time, and it will take changes in mindsets, and I think meanwhile we'll just have to fasten our seat belts.
Yes, and I know that some people are saying, give this 2 years, and maybe with the midterm elections in the United States, that will help stabilize something.
I don't know. I do not put this as personal predilections or prejudices. Certainly personal views of top leaders make a difference. But I think there's a deep view which has formed in countries that the ideal of the world is flat. That we just do business with one another, and it's okay if you sell me all my food and I sell you all your cars and all your solar panels. That is fine. I think now you will ask, what if you stop selling me some of my food? And I will ask, what if one day I need to convert my car line into a armored vehicle line? And how do I do that? So I think there is a fundamental concern that security, that resilience must be weighted more heavily and perhaps given priority over prosperity and interdependence. And therefore, I don't think we will go back to the days when countries pushed without, well, ideally, for a free trade area in the Asia-Pacific, as we expressed it in one of the APEC declarations in Bogor around 1990. But I hope that it will not remain a country where it's a law of the jungle, where what I say is what I do is what I wish to do, and I can do what I like, and nobody can stop me because I say this is national security and therefore it's paramount. Even if it is national security, I don't want to spend myself to bankruptcy, and you don't want to spend yourself to bankruptcy. And in the fields of arms control, we may be opponents, but you still have arms limitation. You still have treaties to keep the competition within limits and prevent things from really blowing up. And I think in trade too, we need to have some rules like that.
李显龙呢，其实提到了3个问题啊。第一个呢，就是李显龙认为中美达成协议的可能性呢很小，原因呢是美国为了维持霸权要遏制中国，而中国呢要继续发展以获取和实力相匹配的地位。两国呢有着根深蒂固的矛盾，短期呢无法调和。其实早在3月4号的时候呢，外交部发言人办公室在叉平台呢发布了一个长篇的声明，指出美国利用芬太尼问题对中国加征关税是一个站不住脚的借口，并表示恐吓呢吓不到中国，欺凌对中国也不会起作用。关键是他最后留下了一句：如果美国想要战争，不管是关税战、贸易战还是其他什么形式的战争，我们都准备一直打到底。怎么说呢？这个就是斗争升级的信号了。本来就是关税战嘛，你只说关税战奉陪到底就好了嘛。但最后那一句还有什么其他形式的战争，我们都奉陪到底，这个就属于态度升级了，而且是主动的升级。潜台词的意思就是说，你想打热战，我们也奉陪。所以话都说到这个份上了，应该不会有什么协议出来了，除非有一方妥协。那李显龙提到的第2个问题就是说，要警惕贸易战的后续。当时二战前呢，就是各国贸易保护主义盛行日本袭击珍珠港的主要原因呢，就是美国限制了日本的石油和橡胶的贸易，这个算是他的一个提醒吧。不过我觉得只要中美不打热战，都谈不上第3次世界大战，这个呢就看领导人的定力和智慧了。最后呢，他表示全球的自由贸易已经一去不复返了，最好的结果呢，可能就是区域性的自由贸易，比如亚太自由贸易这种。总的来说他的观点呢还是比较客观的。好，我是刘大，如果你觉得我的分享还不错的话，欢迎点赞、订阅和留言。这次分享呢就到这里，谢谢大家。